Yes, I think it's still possible to affirm divine action even though we're in an age of science. And I think we can look to the first chapter of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It tells us a couple of things about God, that God exists and that God acts. Now, if we're going to talk about action, we have to have some sort of an understanding of causality. In Aristotle and Aquinas, there was a rich notion of causality. They had four causes: the material, formal, efficient, and final causes. And also they appreciated the causality of chance. So say in the making of a statue, the marble would be the material cause from which it's made. The formal cause would be the shape of the statue. The efficient cause would be the sculpture. And the final cause might be something like the beauty of the finished product, that for which the thing is done. Now, when modern science came along and studied the world in terms of quantity, causes that couldn't be quantified, that couldn't be measured, tended to drop out. So formal cause, that by which a thing is what it is, and final cause, the purpose for which something is done, can't be measured, so they dropped out. Eventually, cause was reduced to the force that moves the atoms. So it meant that if we were going to talk about God's causality, we had to picture God as some sort of a force who shoves some atoms around. But there are already laws of nature that explain all of the motion of the atoms. So it looked like God was going to interfere with the world if God did anything. Some theologians and philosophers said there was simply no room for God to act in the world. But luckily, with contemporary science, there's an implicit reintroduction, I would say, of the causality of Aristotle, perhaps not explicit, but an implicit retrieval. You find it, say, in the recovery of the notion of chance in quantum mechanics. There's the spontaneous decay of an atom. It doesn't seem to have any cause. It's quantum chance that makes it happen. Or in evolution, there's spontaneous change in genetic material. What causes it? It also seems to be chance. So that notion comes back. In many sciences, there's the notion of emergence, or the causality of the whole. The whole is said to emerge somehow from the parts and then exercise a top-down causality on the parts. So the bunny becomes the cause that emerges from all of the atoms that make him up, and he causes the motion of those atoms as he hops across the back lawn. So it's a top-down causality. Again, the notion that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Then the question arises, what is it that makes the whole to be a whole? And the answer in Aristotle is substantial form. So some are looking again to the notion of form. In biology, the idea of purpose is coming back in new ways. Some say that final causality or purpose is essential to the study of biology. So teeth are for chewing and stomachs are for digesting and so on. Well, as those kinds of causality are retrieved, they can be used also again in theology. God doesn't have to be conceived simply as a force that moves atoms around, but as the transcendent cause of all creation. God is the ultimate final cause, the ultimate good towards which creation moves, and that good towards which each creature is reaching in each thing that it does, implicitly seeking the final cause, the good which is God. God is also the formal exemplar cause, as the idea of a statue is first in the mind of the artist. So we might say that all of creation, all of creatures were first in the divine mind. They have their source there, and in everything that they do, they reflect the goodness of God. God is also the ultimate efficient cause. God acts in and through all creatures. He doesn't interfere with creaturely causality, but he's rather the source of the causality of creatures. So through necessary causes that we find in the world, God allows them to produce necessary effects. In contingent causes, like the blossoming of flower, it doesn't have to happen, but God is there present also in that contingency, allowing it to be a contingent effect. God is in free causes as well, like human free will, not interfering with our freedom, but rather the very source of our human freedom. And even in chance events, we might say that God is not absent, God does not interfere, but is the source of all of the kinds of causality that we find in the world. And of course, beyond the causality of creatures, God can also act beyond nature in doing miracles. We might look at the classical miracle of the parting of the Red Sea, or changing the water into wine at the marriage feast of Cana. God doesn't act against nature, but acts beyond nature, producing special signs of his love. Just as nature reflects the goodness of God, so miracles also reflect God's goodness and point to God's revelation. So God, along with the miracles, can act in the world, and all of creation then can reflect the goodness of God. As the psalm says, the heavens proclaim the glory of God.